So we're here in Tŷ'r, Pererin, which is in St David's. It's an education centre attached to the cathedral. And St David's, of course, is it can either be the end point or it might be the starting point of this new pilgrimage route, depending on which way you might choose to walk it.
But you're not on it at all, is it?
So
feedback there.
Okay, so I think most people who have booked are here. So yeah, we're doing again like the session in Owlet that some of you joined.
I see you said it was music, but I can't hear it.
Yeah, so we have some people in the room that you can see on one screen, and obviously we're being joined from other places as well. And yes, so this is a kind of final session in a way of these kind of seminar type events or sharing events. And I've called this session a Casgliad, which is Welsh for the gathering. And I'm kind of seeing it as a way to sort of bring some of the threads together of this project so far, and to give anybody a chance to say anything more that they might want to say. Yeah, we also have, I've also invited a speaker, John Roach is here, and he's going to share something about, well, a story connected to Pembrokeshire, but also the Welsh diaspora. But I wanted to start today just by revisiting the map, just to bring us back to the map where people have been sharing songs, and also where we've also been posting the talks from this series. So I'm just going to go to the map. So this is our map. I hope everyone can see it on the Zoom as well as in the room. Obviously, we're projecting on a screen in the room, and you can see there are many more dots since we started the project. All the talks are on there, and there are songs have been put on, recorded in Wexford. So I invite everyone to have a look at the map. And I wanted to just show a recording. Well, I wanted to say that, yeah, the map remains open, and if anybody wants to record a song that calls them back home, or the song Pererin Wyf, and pin it to the map, that is still possible to do, and we would love you to do that, and also to share it with your friends or anybody you think might be interested. I wanted to we've been thinking about the Welsh and Irish diaspora as part of this project, and connecting with them and through the idea of pilgrimage. Now, I wanted to share a song that I was sent at Christmas by this group, Rachel Ball and her siblings, who wrote, "We are David and Carol Ball's grandkids from Maryland. Oldest to youngest, we are Rachel, Megan, Jocelyn, Alex and Hannah Ball. Our grandfather is a very proud Welshman. His deep love for Wales has passed on to his 3 children and 10 grandchildren, who have embraced the Welsh culture, language, and traditions. The 5 of us in the video are the children of the middle son. We celebrate St. David's Day, even taking daffodils to American teachers. We treasured the time spent with family in Wales, with whom connections remain strong. We chose to sing ar-lein all through the night. And I'm going to play that recording. Sleep, my child, and peace attend Guardian angels, God will send thee, our healing host. Soft the drowsy eyes are creeping, hill and dale in slumber sleeping. I, my loved ones, watch and keeping, our healing host. Angels watching air around me, our healing host. Midnight slumber close surround me, our healing host. Soft the drowsy eyes are creeping, hill and dale in slumber sleeping. I, my loved ones, watch and keeping, our healing host. So that was Rachel Ball and her siblings, the grandchildren of a Welshman who emigrated to America and brought up his children there. What they also wrote when they sent that recording was that they would sing the song in English because they did not speak Welsh, which kind of leads me to the next part of tonight. So I have invited, we talked a bit about the Welsh in America, but what we haven't talked about is Patagonia, which is also a place that Welsh people emigrated to. And John Roach has come here tonight, who's going to share some information about that relates directly to Pembrokeshire as well, and his own family. So I'm going to hand over to John now, if that's okay.
Thank you. Noswaith dda. Buenos tardes. Oh, good evening. Buenos tardes is probably very relevant because Patagonia is in Argentina, Spanish speaking. So, lots of Welsh people, about 150 Welsh people emigrated to Patagonia in 1865. And some of the reasons they went was for linguistic and religious reasons. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of the treason of the Blue Books. The Blue Books treason. At the beginning of of this time, in the mid-1840s, there was a politician in Birmingham, a Welsh politician, funnily enough, Welsh-speaking, who believed that Welsh children were being hindered by being Welsh speakers. And he decided that they should try to stop the people of Wales speaking Welsh. And many of the people in Wales that they actually interviewed were people of the Anglican faith. And obviously at this time, the Welsh people wanted to worship in their own language, which was Welsh. And the Anglican Church felt that their numbers were dropping, so everything all connected together meant that they wanted to abolish the Welsh language, and one of the methods they used was Welsh knot, and it was a piece of wood which hung around a child's neck in school. The first child heard speaking Welsh in school was given this piece of wood called the Welsh knot, and whenever that child heard another child speaking Welsh, they passed it on. You can imagine the bullying that would take place. And whichever child was wearing that Welsh knot at the end of the day was caned. So that was a method of trying to stop the Welsh language being spoken. So many people in Wales were fed up with this, and they decided they had to emigrate. And one reason for going was that it was the bigotry, and many emigrated to America, and some brave souls emigrated all the way down to Patagonia, which is in Argentina, hence my greeting in Spanish. Now, Argentina had become independent from Spain at the beginning of the 19th century, and it invited immigration from many regions of the world. And not only are there Welsh people there are Scots people, Italian people, Irish people, lots of different nationalities moved there during the 19th century. Now, the passages I've got relate to a journal written by my grandfather's brother. My grandfather's name was Thomas Jones. I wonder how many people have Tom Jones in their family. And but his name was James Jones, my grandfather's brother. And it's a story that fascinates artists, storytellers, and generations of Welsh people. And he emigrated to Patagonia to work on his uncle's ranch in the 1880s, to hopefully make his fortune. He became a ranch manager and a horse breaker, and trekked herds of horses over the Andes to sell to warring factions, probably in Chile. One night, he was attacked by a mountain lion, but in killing it, he was badly mauled, and he was found by, in those days they called them Indians, but the indigenous people of that region, who nursed him back to health. On another expedition, his companion died, and James became lost, attempting to round up the horses on his own. He finally staggered home a skeletal wreck, having survived on wild berries and snakes he'd caught and eaten. Later, an accident crippled him, and his days of riding the pampas ended. And he subsequently returned to Pembrokeshire, married, and made a living wherever he could. Now, having lived in Patagonia for several years, he became quite a proficient linguist, and during his 12-year adventure, and during the 2 world wars, he worked as an interpreter at Fishguard Harbour. So travel does broaden the mind. Now, the name Patagonia was coined by Ferdinand Magellan, the first European to sail around Cape Horn on a Spanish expedition. And the name Patagonia means the land of people with big feet. 150 people sailed on the Mimosa in 1865 on the 28th of May, and they landed in Argentina, Patagonia then, on the 28th of July. So 2 months it took them to cross the Atlantic. The settlers chose the Camoy Valley as their home, but found the area difficult to grow crops, and it took them several years to actually build irrigation channels. And being in the southern hemisphere compounded this difficulty, as in the early years, as the seasons occurred at different times of the year in the southern hemisphere. Now, I've got some extracts to read from James Jones's journal. I'm not sure if I mentioned, I met James Jones's grandson many years ago, and he told me he had a journal of his grandfathers who'd lived in Patagonia, but he couldn't read Welsh. He couldn't understand Welsh. And so I told him, well, I'm a Welsh speaker. Why don't I translate it for you? So I've translated it, and I'll just read parts of it now that I've made from which I've made notes. One of the settlers eventually calculating that irrigating the land was the only successful way of producing a harvest, and after yielding a crop of wheat, led to the realization by his fellow settlers that the Camwy Valley was one of the best agricultural valleys in the world, provided it was irrigated. Work commenced in earnest to evacuate channels from the river to provide water to the wheat fields. And from that time to the present day, the settlement has been relatively successful, despite some difficulties, and many people have achieved a state of genuine comfort, this having been accomplished in a short space of time. But there are those, of course, who have not achieved this level of wealth, as it happens in all societies. The Camwy Valley is predominantly a wheat-producing region, and it is upon this crop nearly everybody depends. Very little fruit and vegetables have grown there, but far more notice is now taken of horticultural skills. No crop of any type can be grown without irrigating the land. Canals have been excavated to carry water to practically every part of the valley. Ditches have been dug to carry the water to the different farms, and it is from these ditches the water is released to irrigate the fields. Now then, we'll move on to ploughs and horses. I found this quite an interesting section. The horses are smaller in stature than those found in Wales and are of many different colours, similar to those found in circuses. Some are more stubborn than mules and have characters full of trickery. These will not obey any command except when it pleases them. When working in pairs, one animal may be the most obedient to run, whilst the others will do it utmost to hinder the task or attempt to escape. The ploughman will require absolute control over the team and the patience of Job to complete the task successfully. There is a tale where one farmer failed to maintain his patience with a stubborn horse in his charge and tied a sack made from animal skin to its tail. The horse broke loose and escaped into the wasteland, never to be seen again. No doubt it believed its master was constantly following him. Now then, the harvests. Seeds in Patagonia are sown in September and ripen in February. Summer and winter in Patagonia do not coincide with the seasons in Wales. Their summer is at the same time as our winter. Christmas occurs in the height of summer, and there is a song to be heard in the settlement entitled Christmas in Midsummer. If celebrating Christmas in the middle of summer appeals to you, Patagonia is the place to live. When threshing has been completed, the crops are placed in sacks, each one holding 100 to 150 pounds. The produce is then taken to market in either wagon or cart pulled by horses or oxen, domesticated for this purpose. It is sold in the town's market and transported across the sea to the Republic's capital, Buenos Aires, a distance of 800 miles. There's a little chapter which tickled me on Buenos Aires, and it's about how they made butter. Buenos Aires, the Argentine Republic's capital city, has approximately a population of 1.5 million. We've got to remember this was written at the end of the 19th century. It is one of the most important cities in South America, and it exchanges a healthy trade with many ports in different parts of the world. The citizens are fond of a spirited existence and live life to the full, even on the Lord's Day. Most of the city's inhabitants are Roman Catholic, but very few attend church, and the majority of those are female. It is, however, very rare to witness exhibitions of drunkenness on the streets, and the city could be demonstrated as an example to many towns in our country. One of the most amusing customs I witnessed in that city was of churning. A person would pour cream into tall earthenware jars or tin cans, placed in small sacks for protection. They were then placed astride donkeys, 2 containers per donkey. These would then have been led through the streets to trot and churn the cream to butter, and then the butter would be sold from house to house. Houses in the settlement. The Welsh settlers' houses in the Camwy Valley are constructed mainly from clay bricks. There are also stone-built houses and a large number of houses constructed from mud. In the early days of the settlement, most houses were built from clay bricks, dried in the sun, not kiln-dried. Today, events and methods have changed for the better, and there are many grand and well-constructed houses made from kiln-dried clay bricks. The furnishings were very bare. Upon examination of the interior of settlers' houses, one can see they are untidy in comparison to our own Welsh homes. Very few items of furniture can be found, as a rule, only when it is necessary. Very few houses have elegant furniture, such as sofas, couches, but improvements are now being made to introduce these. There was a time when a box took the place of a table in many a house, and very few chairs can be found in some of these houses today. In fact, boxes and benches frequently take the place of many items of furniture. Now, the vegetation in the area. Trees are few and far between in this settlement. Willows are in abundance along the banks of the Camwy River, but they are as bent as the river itself. Many poplar trees have been planted and are beginning to grow well, so there's an abundance of firewood, such as thorns and other bushes, and a particularly type of red thorn. An efficient fuel for the fire provides an effective form of heat, and wood is used by all as fuel for the fire. I'll move on now. James Jones wrote about the advantages and disadvantages. Although the settlers have toiled tirelessly to construct canals to carry water to the farms, they have many hardships. They recognize the advantages of settling there as well as the disadvantages. Imagine you'd emigrated to the United States or to Canada, settling on a farm surrounded by forest from boundary to boundary. It would take a lifetime, including your children's, to clear the property of trees. There are no problems of that nature in Patagonia, because it is a broad expanse of just land. Let's put these down. Where am I now? Customs. Most pastimes are carried out on horseback, especially by the young. Everyone is fond of horse riding. One very rarely sees anyone walking, especially if a horse is available. In this manner, as in many others, the Welsh settlers have imitated their Argentinian neighbours. Those too idle to travel 20 yards without entering the saddle, it is on horseback one witnesses most of the Welsh settlers, even attending public worship on Sunday. If you were to witness a place of worship, you would see 30, 40, or even 50 horses around the building in a manner to suggest that members of the congregation were being enlisted as the members of a cavalry. There are often large numbers of dogs would also be in attendance, and at times would disturb the proceedings most horrendously, as you can imagine. Hymn singing and dogs howling in the back. All right, now then. Hospitality. One aspect upon which the inhabitants may be congratulated is the level of welcome they bestow on all. It is a special virtue of the Patagonian Welsh. Imagine yourself on a journey through the vast settlement and happen to stop at a house on the roadside. You'd witness the lady in the house placing the kettle on the fire, and woe betide you if you made an excuse to leave before having a cup of tea. Also, there's a danger of night falling after arriving home. An overnight stay is considered normal practice. Now, on to the wild animals. I spoke to you earlier on about James having been attacked by a lion and surviving. Now, among the wild animals, one finds the guanaco, or the Patagonian camel, related to the llama and the alpaca. And they are actually cameloids. The puma, the Patagonian lion, the wildcat, the fox, the skunk, the armadillo, and the hare. And most remarkable of these is the guanaco. I'm unsure if this is a true description, but it appears to be a cross between a sheep and a camel. A reddish yellow in colour, measuring 5 to 6 foot in length and 4 foot tall. It is hunted by the native Indians, but is very difficult to catch on account of its speed. A gentleman called Gallegos described as such, "You are an unusual animal. You have the neigh of a stallion, the wool of a sheep, the neck of a camel, the feet of a stag, and the speed of the devil." Another notable creature in Patagonia is the puma. This is a type of lion, grey or yellow-grey, and measuring 5 to 6 foot in length. One cannot say if it is as ferocious as the African lion, but it is very destructive, especially among flocks of sheep. Now, I spoke to you earlier on about the Indians. Apparently the Welsh people got on very well with the indigenous people. The Argentinian government actually wanted to put the indigenous people into reservations, but they actually got on and lived side by side with the Welsh people and traded with them. And in fact, they traded meat for the Welsh bread. And I think they adopted the word bara, which is the Welsh for bread, into their own language. So, and I'll come to the end now, once I can find it. Here we are. And James wrote, "One thing I wish to point out for those of you considering emigrating to Patagonia, to settle in the Camoi Valley. The truth is that all the farmland has now been established, and has been for many years. One need not despair, as there are rich lands in valleys to be found at the edges of the Andes. Gold and other minerals can be found on those frontiers, and when a rail link has been completed, the interior will be ready to accept thousands of Welsh people willing to develop a settlement in the same manner as the farmers. Many Welsh settlers have established an interior called Cwm Hyfryd. Cwm is the Welsh word for valley, and Hyfryd is beautiful. The land is promising there. I spent some weeks at Cwm Hyfryd, but time is too short at present to give you a great deal of information about the place. It gave me great pleasure when I was there to experience the nature in its most romantic form. Who would not want to live in such a fruitful valley, surrounded by the famous towering mountains of the Andes, stretching upwards to the clouds above, their caps covered with snow? And what Welshman would not wish for his beloved language to be spoken as the river flows by all inhabitants? When James Jones returned to Wales, he'd completed a journal, and he used to go around village halls talking to the Welsh people of this area and further afield about his adventures in Patagonia, which I found absolutely fascinating to read. I mean, there are a lot more than I've read out here today, but it was a fascinating exercise trying to translate it all. It took me a while, but it was very, very interesting. Thank you very much for listening. Has anybody got any questions?
Well, thank you, John. I think what you said there about him travelling around the village halls of Pembrokeshire, I found that fascinating, that idea of somebody coming back and telling of what he'd seen in that way. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about before. I've obviously read about Patagonia and know about it, but to be so close to when the first people had gone out there and to be coming back, and whether it was persuading people to go, or the pros and cons of whether they should go or not.
Oh, that's right, yes. But he was definitely trying to convince people it would have been a good decision to have actually sailed over to Patagonia.
Have you been there?
I've not been there, unfortunately. It was one of my dreams, but it hasn't come about yet. I wanted to go to Buenos Aires to learn to dance the tango, but there we are.
I've been to Port Madryn.
Oh, right.
Which is where they landed.
Yes.
You talk about the different sort of the agriculture there. There is nothing there. It's desert. Virtually.
Yes, yes.
And you can see the caves. They had to dig out of the caves just to sleep there. But I can't imagine what they thought, having left Bala and other places in Wales, landing in this desert with no way back, really.
No, that was it. That was it.
It's
and it took them years, actually, to
yeah.
actually build the canals so they could irrigate the land to grow the crops.
And I think if it wasn't the way they were accepted by the indigenous population there who helped them,
yes, that's right.
They would not have survived.
No.
And the fact being that they took Bibles and not guns.
Yes, so important. Yes, indeed, definitely.
Which, yeah, so it's a bit of a, it might seem a bit of a tangent to what might have been expected from this session tonight, but I thought it was an important experience that we talked about from our from the Welsh side of the pilgrim route. That this I mean we call it a colony, a ladfa in Welsh in Patagonia, and I know on the call I think Megan is here. Who's in America, in North America, and Mary was here. Mary is the leader of the North American Welsh Choir, I thought it was interesting to share the different experience of the Welsh in America, North America, and South America. But I don't know if anybody has any questions about what John has talked about, or any points. Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, I just one small question. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear it very plainly all the time, particularly in the early stages. But I'd love to just ask the speaker to just go back to that point where he was talking about this, the stick around the neck, and
the Welsh knot.
Yes, we had this here. We called it a tally stick.
Oh, right.
And in our case, it was mainly implemented. I think it began in the new national school system, in which Irish, of course, was forbidden completely, and speaking of Irish. And each word of Irish that you spoke, this is in the 19th century, from 1830 onwards. It was roughly that type of experience, but it was supported to a considerable extent, as I understand it anyway, particularly after the famine, by the people themselves who had lost all faith in Ireland. Britain was rising, and it seemed that they were they had a manifest destiny, as they say. And Irish self-confidence sagged completely after the famine, and they began to discard books of all sorts from homes by the wheelbarrow full sort of thing. Old manuscripts mainly. Not very old now, but copied manuscripts, copies. But that's how people shared the stories that were available. And we had this thing, it was called a guide in Irish. There's a phrase, an gad a yara isgura dun winnol, I think it is, to cut the gad next to the neck. My mother, who came from a parish with which I personally associate many sort of relic words of Irish spoken as if they were English, at least in my youth, she had that expression, but she used it, I think, in a different context. It was to make the best of a bad situation. That was the meaning, I think, that she had. I can't fit it in any other way. But I just wondered, was it the Welsh people themselves who notched the tally sticks for their children? to try to prevent it, or was it done in schools?
It was done, yes, it was done in schools, so that next generation of children growing up wouldn't have the Welsh language or were discouraged from speaking Welsh. I mean, I was brought up in a Welsh-speaking family and I didn't hear English until I went to school. And it was just something, but my grandmother could remember the Welsh knot. And she was born in 1887, so she could remember the Welsh knot. And it was a case, and that you can imagine really, if an older child heard a small child speaking Welsh, they would pass it on. But if that smaller child heard an older child speaking Welsh, they'd be very reluctant to pass it on. So it was almost encouraging a form of bullying as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. If I can just add to that, Rowan, you're quite right. There was a lot of acquiescence by the Welsh people of this. They wanted their children to learn English. So there isn't, in a Welsh context, there isn't formal, education, state education, if you like, which is obligatory for all children until the 1870s and the 1880s. So what you have prior to that is, as you were saying in Ireland, the national school system, the British school system, which were voluntary technically, so that the parents were sending their children to voluntary schools, but where Welsh, as has rightly been said now, was frowned upon. And you get the same sort of system going on in the British Empire more generally. If you go to Africa, you'll see the same sort of thing happening, using a similar thing to the Welsh knot in colonial situations. It was a general practice, And as I say, a lot of the people, especially by the time we get to the middle of the 19th century in Wales, as you say, as in Ireland, a lot of people had given up on the language and saw that it wasn't something that was going to last. And things like Darwinism encouraged that attitude, the survival of the fittest. Yeah. So what you get in a Welsh context in Victorian period is Welsh nonconformists trying to set up English language causes where there was no call for them at all. But they wanted to preserve the religion after the language had died out.
Yes.
Now, then there are other people like Michael D. Jones, one of the fathers of the Patagonian venture, who are very vehement against that and are arguing against it and arguing for the preservation of the language. But a lot of people, there was basically a lack, as you said, of confidence in the future of the language, and wanted to preserve what the best they could of the culture through the medium of English.
And is there, just maybe from my point of view anyway, just to finish off on this, is there any book written by anybody who deals with the process of divestiture of language all over the world, in all the empires? Why does West Africa speak French? How was that done? How did he opt up? Surely there must be some reference book somewhere at how that process takes place.
I can't think of one book personally immediately, but you get the same sort of thing in India, don't you? Where and part of that I think is because in the present states in Africa and parts of wherever colonialism has gone, really. Yes. Once you see straight lines on maps, you know that they're not natural divisions. Yeah. And therefore, what you get within that state is a number of what I would refer to really as little nations, who have their own cultural traditions and language, etc. And then they're using the colonial language as the lingua franca. Yes. So that's the other thing that drives this along, I think. Yeah. There's the element of getting on in the world, but there's also an element of getting on with your fellow countrymen, because you're working across cultural and linguistic groups. Yes, very good point. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question about the where the diary that was being translated from is now? Is it in private possession, or has it gone into
It's now in the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth.
All right. You ought to publish your translations. Perhaps Megan with Nina would be interested in some parts of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's exactly what John's presentation brings up there around language and why we still have the language or don't have it in the same way, perhaps. We were in the last session. We were asking what's the song that calls you home, and we were hosted in Owlet, and we heard many singers, but some singers sang through Zoom as well, and some people did sing Welsh songs, and so we have been focusing, or we've taken our inspiration in this project from the hymn Pererin Wyf, and this idea of being a pilgrim in the world, and what that means for the Welsh and Irish diaspora, but in that session we sang many different songs, and I don't want to sort of spring this on Paul. Paul has here tonight. He has already pinned the song to the map. He did sing Pererin Wyf, and he filmed himself at the ruins of his grandparents' farm in Mynachog Ddu, in Pembrokeshire. That place still means a lot to you, and I shouldn't speak for you, but you've got something else to share tonight, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got a letter, excuse me. I need to find it. And it's one thing about pilgrimage is that this isn't a pilgrimage. The letter isn't a pilgrimage to a place. It's pilgrimage to a person and a way of life. And it's a letter from my grandfather, who came from Mynachog Ddu, but was brought up in Pontypridd in the Rhondda Valley, the coal mining industrial area. And it's a letter from him to my eldest daughter. They're his first great-grandchild. And I like this because I think this ties us to our country, to our place, and it's about music as well. He was a passionate musician. And this is what he said. For Rebecca, a true tale, June 1987. 131 years ago, two families were neighbours in Mill Street, Pontypridd. They were close friends. Both were active members of Carmel Baptist Chapel on Graigwen Hill near Mill Street. Both loved singing and playing the harp. And parents and children went together to chapel meetings, services, Sunday school, and all the church special events. One family kept a milliner's shop, making and selling bonnets, capes, and all the other garments worn by ladies about 100 years ago, 150 years ago now. Their shop had the grand name, the Temple of Fashion. The other family were weavers and wool merchants working in the mill called Tŷ'r factory. The milliners were my aunts of my mother, your great-great-grandmother. I think we might be a great short there. There we are. The weavers were named James, the father, Evan James, and the son, James James. A great deal of wool woven in the mill, and the woven materials were sold in the shop and used for the milliner's work. This is the tale of a wonderful event on a winter's night in 1856, a tale partly told to me as a young lad by my mother and aunt, and perhaps from the writings of an old Welsh bard, Morian, a close family friend of both families. The story told by Evan James. One winter's night in 1856, my wife and children had gone to a service at Carmel Chapel, and I was quite alone. I'd been thinking about the thrilling instance in the history of Wales. My age at the time was 46, and my eldest son, James, was 24. He was an excellent harpist. I'd gone upstairs to go to bed early and was partly undressed when I heard James entering the house and calling out, Yn ha, dewch chi lawr yn union, come down immediately. So he shouted so excitedly that I went downstairs as I was. I've been for a walk along the banks of the Rhondda, said my son, and of the sound of the river's roar composed a new melody. His face was aglow, and I asked him to play the tune on his harp. He brought it forth to the middle of the room, and with closed eyes sought to recall the notes, which had the dancing waters of the Rhondda, and had inspired my son's soul. During the playing, my wife returned from Carmel Chapel. When she came into the room, cried out angrily, What in the world is the meaning of this, playing the harp on a Sunday? Ma Manuel, replied James. David played the harp in the house of the Lord. When my son played the melody again, we all listened entranced. This was Evan's story, translated into English. Morian added, Wales had found her national anthem that Sunday evening, and Father James was inspired by his son's melody to write the Welsh verses Hen Wlad Fy Nhadau. When I was a boy, this is my grandfather speaking, I think. When I was a boy, I recall my mother and aunt relating how the next day James and Evan went across the road to the Temple of Fashion with words and music, and one of the aunts, who had a good singing voice, sang the new anthem. And it was her proud boast afterwards that she was the first singer of the Welsh national anthem. The name given to the tune by Evan James was Glan Rhondda. Well, Rebecca, I hope this true story of the birth of the Welsh national anthem will please and interest you. With our love, Nan and Grandpa George. And that's the story passed through the generations.
Oh, lovely. That's lovely, yeah. That's a remarkable story.
It's lovely,
yes.
isn't it?
Remarkable, lovely.
And to me, it ties. His father was born in Monachlog in Pembrokeshire, which is the house we saw, the ruin we saw. Moved to Pontypridd, the coal mining areas of Pontypridd, to get work. His son, my grandfather, was born there, and came back to teach in Pembrokeshire, and they spent their life in Pembrokeshire. And that's where we are today. That's it.
Where did he teach in Pembrokeshire?
Camrose South School.
All right.
Between Haverfordwest and St David's.
Yes.
So he was the country. He was the headmaster for many.
What was his name?
George John. G.W. John. And we talked. You mentioned that this is the anniversary of the BBC broadcasting Welsh for the first time. Mm. My grandfather pioneered the recorder being used in school, and took that to the BBC to record a school's hour.
Oh, tremendous, yes.
And my wife will tell you, who is a music teacher, that the recorder is used in every single school, and you wouldn't believe the orifices that the kids can stick it up.
Been there. Been there. I've taught the recorder in school.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That's a really amazing connection and story. Thank you for sharing that with us today. And yeah, does anybody have anything comment or question for Paul about that story?
If I can add a postscript to that, to link it in with the diaspora, according to one tradition at any rate, the reason why Evan James wrote the words, obviously inspired by the music, but was because he was being encouraged by other members of his family who had emigrated to America to emigrate himself. And the words, the suggestion is that the words, you know, the land of my fathers is dear to me, were in reaction to that, and saying, no, I don't want to go to America, I want to stay back in the land of my fathers. So that links in a sense with the diaspora theme we've been discussing now indirectly.
Yeah, thank you, Wyn. So I have yeah. I wanted to. I played Paul's film that he made in Mynachlog I had a Zoom call with Mary, who is the choir leader of the North American Welsh choir. Unfortunately, she was on the call, but she's had to leave, so she's no longer here. But her choir did record, well, a small group of them. They can't always, they're spread right across America, so they can, sometimes they meet in small groups, but they do rehearsals over Zoom, I think, quite a lot. And they are just currently preparing for a tour of Wales this summer. And so they're across America and Canada. But when I spoke to Mary about this project and showed her Paul's film in the old farmhouse in Mynachlog, she was about to, with her choir, be at an event that was it was the centenary or the anniversary of a Baptist chapel, which was actually the sort of sister, or it was somehow related to the chapel in Mynachlog, this chapel that the choir was singing in. And I'm going to just share my screen and go back to the map and play you that recording. So yeah, that was the North American Welsh Choir singing Pererin Wyf at the Central Baptist Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania, on the occasion of the 125th anniversary of the congregation. And the congregation had a founding relationship with Bethel Chapel in Monachloglwy, Pembrokeshire. I don't know if you saw on the wall behind the group singing, there was a quote from Martin Luther King, which said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And yeah, I wasn't sure what this event would be, but I found that I have actually written something to sort of a bit about how this project first came about, and also how it's been over these last couple of months that we've been doing these sessions. So I'm going to take this opportunity to speak these words. So the form and structure of this project was informed in the first instance by a course I attended online during the autumn-winter lockdown of 2020, hosted by Ards and North Down Borough County Council as part of their ongoing Good Relations programme, a statutory requirement of councils in Northern Ireland introduced through the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. They are run across all counties, offering cross-community education activities to foster good community relations, inclusive of race, religion, and political opinion. And this is a quote from their sort of course booklet. The cross-community programme introduces participants to places and people they would not normally visit or meet. Each week is followed by facilitated discussion in a safe place on the event, place, and the effect it has had on society today. Normally, the programme follows the cross-community influence through World War I, the Easter Rising, the Troubles, ex-combatants, Belfast Good Friday Agreement, etc. With Brexit looming, we decided this year to look at migration, emigration, and immigration. My words again. The final talk in this series was presented by Professor Peter Shirlow, Director of the Institute of Irish Studies at Liverpool University. His talk focused on migration from Northern Ireland that took place as a result of the Troubles, the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. As part of his talk, he included the 300,000 soldiers who served in Northern Ireland. I had not been a vocal participant in the discussion elements of these talks, but in this session I was moved to speak and told the story of my uncle, Michael Dennis O'Neill, born in London to an Irishman from Carlow, who in the early 70s signed up with the Royal Engineers. Following basic training and bridge building on Skye, he found himself deployed in Northern Ireland, a situation that was incomprehensible to him. Why was he fighting himself? Unable to afford to buy himself out, he served his term, but left as soon as he was able. I'm not sure he ever fully recovered from this experience. In late February 2022, my uncle died, and in March that year, I travelled with my parents to attend his cremation. At the time, I was in the midst of writing the tender application that would become this project. In June, I travelled to Wexford on a research trip. I visited EPIC, the Museum of Emigration in Dublin, the Dunbrody Famine Ship, Wexford Library, and drove up to Carlow in search of an ancestral home. I carried with me a small container of my uncle's ashes, thinking perhaps I would find a suitable spot to scatter him to the four winds. I'm still carrying the pot today. An aim of this project has been to connect with the diaspora of both Pembrokeshire and Wexford. It is not a task I have taken on lightly. My original title for today's session was Casgliad, a Welsh term I had learnt on a previous project in the Preseli Mountains for the collective gathering of sheep from the mountain at the end of the grazing season. This session today I had imagined as just that, a gathering up of stray threads and omissions. I worried later that the term was too agricultural and so perhaps disrespectful of human cultural activity, and changed it to a casgliad. Casgliad can be a gathering, but also a kind of conclusion or summing up. I'll take this opportunity to do just that and start by thinking about the presentations that have formed this series. Our starting point was the hymn, Pererin Wyf. The first verse, Pererin Wyf mewn Tŷ'r yn crwydro yma a thraw, ac yn rhyw ddisgwyl bob yn awr, bod ti fy nhad ger llaw. I am a pilgrim in a barren land, in a desert land, walking here and there, and half expecting at some hour that my Father's house is at hand. In our first session, Professor James gave an introduction to the life and context of the man who'd written that hymn, giving clarity to the sense that though to some of us today these words may be archaic or not expressive of our contemporary life, a hymn is no less akin to a folk song and a personal expression of feeling. We then reminisced with David Greenslade about his extensive travels in North America, seeking out and meeting with the Welsh diaspora, and his own experience of setting up a Welsh society in Atlanta, Georgia. He left us with another question. How would you how, as an individual, might you set up a Welsh society? Gareth Bonello spoke of Welsh missionary activity in northeast India and his attempts to make sense of that legacy in contemporary times, whilst being sensitive to imbalances of cultural exchange. Pamela Petro referenced pilgrimage explicitly, connecting it to hiraeth and concluding, if you feel an affinity to a far distant place, then it feels like home and you can call it so. Catherine Dunn spoke of the essential loneliness of having to leave home and never being able to go back, focusing on the Irish experience of the mid-20th century rather than the 19th century famine. Helen Phelan continued that thread, connecting today's renewed interest with pilgrimage to the contemporary experience of forced migration due to conflict and climate change, a shared experience of many in the world today. And finally, Rachel and John explored the depth of knowledge one can find in the local and the subtle differences of experience that might actually unite us. And so last Tuesday, people gathered at the Bygone Days Story House in Owlet, Wexford, at the invitation of Rachel and John, with a question in mind: what is the song that calls you home? And those present shared their songs of Wexford, and we witnessed in the room and through Zoom, and shared our songs of Wales and other places too. And some people told stories, and some recited verse. A powerful poem that I think was called The Aboriginal championed the blackthorn that bounds the field and endures as a metaphor for the story of a nation. And Brian recited a poem that, thanks to its inclusion on the Irish Leaving Certificate for the past few decades, is now known all over the world. Not an ancient Irish text, but a late 20th century poem. A poem about a lion who has only one tree to look at from the cage of its captivity. To younger generations in Wales, the name Pantycelyn, the farm forever associated with the hymn writer William Williams, is possibly more familiar as the name of a hall of residence at Aberystwyth University for students who wish to live their university life through the medium of the Welsh language. Threatened with closure 10 years ago, it was saved thanks to the vociferousness of student protests, including a sit-in by students both past and present, and members of Cymdeithas yr Iaith, the Welsh Language Society. Last week, Jake and I made a pilgrimage to the original Pantycelyn. The idea had been in my mind from the start of this project, but as the location is outside of Pembrokeshire, the catchment area for the Ancient Connections project, I had not been sure it was right to go. However, when Molara, who is on this call today, sent me a recording of her beautiful arrangement of Pererin Wyf, which she has been teaching to Span's community choir, Cor Pawb, and with the hymn writer's birthday approaching, it seemed the time had come to make that pilgrimage. Rachel and John had shown during their presentation of a film of themselves visiting the farmstead home of the Wexford balladeer P.J. McCall, and them speaking with a direct descendant. It put me in mind of Professor James's introductory presentation and the living link between those living at Pantycelyn now and William Williams. The farm Pantycelyn is situated in Carmarthenshire, a little to the northeast of Llandovery. Making the journey, I was reminded, that Llandovery was the last place I saw my Welsh maternal grandfather alive. Suffering with the extreme delusions brought on by vascular dementia and in need of specialist psychiatric care, the nearest bed that could be found for him was at Blaen Nos, on the outskirts of Llandovery, a very long way from home. At Pantycelyn, Cecil Williams welcomed us in and was happy to show us a parlour room. Cecil is the sixth direct descendant of William Williams, Pantycelyn. He was happy to show us a parlour room where piled on a chair and table were visitor books dating back to the start of the 20th century. Leafing through, we saw signatures from all over the world and scripts in all languages. Individuals and bus trips have all made their way to Pantycelyn. We too were asked to sign. On leaving the farm, we stopped at the top of the lane to film the sign at the entrance, and Jake captured the sheep ambling up the hillside. Homi K. Barber, a theorist of post-colonialism, writes in the book The Location of Culture, "In another's country, that is also your own. Your person divides, and in following the forked path, you encounter yourself in a double movement, one as a stranger and then as a friend." In the nascent spring sun, I turned to Jake and said, "Surely now we must be Welsh." This project has sought an answer to the question, am I a pilgrim? In words derived from the hymn writer William Williams and his hymn Pererin Wyf, the affirmative statement, I am a pilgrim. Over the past few months, we have considered many ideas in relation to pilgrimage as a concept and an act. In translating Pererin Wyf to Irish, I've been using the words is oilithriach me. A more poetic translation, I have been informed, whether Welsh or Irish, would be is dore de me, which means I am an exile for God. And I'm just going to play Mollera's beautiful singing and the film that we created as a result of visiting Pantycelyn.
Pererin Wyf, mewn anialdir, yn cloi draw am athraw, ac yn rhyw ddisgwyl bob yr awr, bod
there. So yeah, and so that church in Llandovery is where William Williams is. We visited Pantycelyn, and we also went to the church where his grave is, and it's a very beautiful old church. And that window that the film there conclude on is a window made by a stained glass maker called John Petts, and the words are Cardi, which some people might read as Cardi, which would be a person from Ceredigion, but actually it's Cardi, which is love thou, and that's, yeah. So that is, those are sort of my concluding remarks on this series of events. Yeah, does anybody else want to share anything? I should say that the other translation of Pererin Wyf into Irish actually comes from Brian, and he might want to explain a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really, looking back on the few months that we have all known each other, I must say that for me anyway, it has, at my age, opened an entirely new interest, which is very good and very healthy for a person. And it wouldn't have happened without your own. Your unique skills and perception and feeling really make friends everywhere you go, and make friends for the project. And we all, and especially all in the storytelling house, and we all appreciate it very much and are very interested, because most of us have emigrants scattered from Australia to the United States, and some indeed in South America. Nowadays, the children, of course, of all our countries are all over the world, everywhere. We too share, like you, an emigration period to Argentina, for instance, in post-famine Ireland. And there's a little town out there called Murphy, after one of the leader and a very wealthy man, I believe, eventually, who came back and brought more people out. He's from County Wexford here. But not to stray from the point and your own contribution and creativity, I believe in my heart that this project, if you will continue it, please, could become very successful altogether and cover the globe. And many, many people and little communities will in time be proud to have a little flag on your map. And I look forward to that. The experience of emigration and the homesicknesses attached to it, which I experienced myself in London at 16 years of age, they are deep and affecting, and they stay with you most of your life. Okay, you go on, you say, okay, we're going ahead, we're not going to dwell on it, but it's there as part of us. And it's nice to explore and reflect and put it to some positive uses. And this project allows them to do that. And you asked there just about the is Geori Dame. Well, Dior in Irish is a Tŷ'r. And Geori is one of our words for an exile for Christ, or as John the 23rd, Pope John Paul II reflected when he came to Ireland, he called them Peregrini pro Christo. And the early missionaries, for instance, this was his term. So it's very like Pererin Wyf. And we also have, we all know the fuchsia. The fuchsia in Irish is Diorini Day, little tears of God. Diori is a lovely word in itself, but it's never far away from the tear. And I can't thank you enough and say how much I hope for the success of the project. Thank you, Rowan. Diolch, Rowan.
Diolch, Brian. Yeah, thank you for that. And also, I want to thank Rachel and John for all you've done for working on the project with us, and especially for the night last Tuesday as well. It was so amazing to see all those singers gathered together in Outlet, and yeah, I think what I was trying to put in what I've written there was that yeah, we're all the same, aren't we? But we are different too, and we are. There is a sea between us, and it's sort of share the things we share, but how we recognise the things that are different as well, and acknowledge that in our stories. I'm just seeing that Mollera you'd put a couple of things in the chat. I wondered if you would elaborate a bit maybe on what you were asking about Patagonia and the indigenous population, but you've also...
Yeah, no, I was just being amazed. Sorry, it's really dark here. No, I was just really amazed about the connection to my Hemlad Van Hadai. And I'm doing a lot of anti-racism work at the moment, and it's very interesting as a person who grew up in the UK, being called all sorts of appalling things, and then went to Nigeria, and all my family said, "Oh, you're going home," and then going to Nigeria, and everybody called me white woman. So for me, I really struggle with those concepts of home. I have songs that remind me of certain eras of my life, but I don't really have songs that give me that feeling of Cynefin or Hiraeth or anything, because I don't feel like I've been allowed to fit into anywhere. The Welsh Government are doing some fantastic anti-racism work, and I think I feel more at home here than I have anywhere else. And there are certain like landscapes, like the Peak District where I was raised, make my heart sing a little bit, but I've never had that feeling. So it's very interesting for me to listen to people that have, or then I'm working on the Welsh Government's Cynefin project via the Arts Council, and again, so many people who were born and raised in Wales but don't feel like they can feel Cynefin because they have English parents or they don't speak Welsh. There's so many different dynamics within our sense of belonging to any culture or any community, and so many personal things that I just have found this whole journey very, very inspirational, but also very, very thought-provoking. So yeah, I thought what you wrote, Rowan, was just stunning. It raised a few tears, and I thought to encapsulate that project from start to where we are now was just really heartwarming and inspiring. And your man's right, you are quite an amazing person. Just thought I'd add that.
Diolch, Mallory. Yeah, I'd titled that bit of writing Diasporic Uncertainty, actually, yeah. And yeah, would anybody else, I don't know, Rachel, I don't want to sort of spring it on you, but I wondered whether you had anything to say perhaps, or a reflection on last Tuesday's event.
Yeah, I suppose last Tuesday was very special, and I'd like to take an opportunity to thank, I suppose, the singers and the storytellers that came along. I mean, we would know them people as friends, and when we asked them to get involved, and when we posed that question, what song calls you home, it did, I suppose, evoke a lot of feelings and brought about a lot of conversations around what song calls you home. Some of the people, like myself and John, home would be a different place at different stages of your life, and it's that trying to fit into that place when you do leave. We're both originally from Dublin, as you know, and when we moved down to the sunny southeast, I suppose for us it was a very conscious decision to get involved in the cultural side of a community. And being a singer, that was, you know, we went around all the singing places. I remember the first place I went to was the Old Mill out in Cranford.
Yeah. Brian,
you'd know the Old Mill. And we met with a lot of those people who came to Owlert on that night. And I suppose John Furlong was there that night as well, another man who would have been a very supportive person in terms of, I suppose, we find through song and stories that we get connected to place. It was through talking with the older people, hearing the older songs, asking, you know, in a particular song like Carrig River, where is Carrig River? Because that name meant nothing to me. And then being brought down to it by a local person. James Doran lives out the road, and, you know, he would have particular names on corners around the area. And, you know, I didn't know about those. I didn't understand it. But he brought us around and said, right, this is what these, and this is why it's called that. And I think that connection with those stories, with the people that have walked that land, who own that land, and them allowing you into it, is what has helped me. And you mentioned that PJ McCall. I mean, going out with Eddie MacDonald around PJ McCall's father's homestead, that day was extremely special and will stick with me forever, because I felt it from Eddie while he walked it. I felt he was reliving memories and connections himself, but the generosity of spirit for him to actually share that with us and with my children, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget walking that land and him pointing out the landscape off, and he had wrote a recitation about that, you know, about Clonmore. And we got him to recite it on that hill, looking out, and the power in that, the power of, I could feel the power from him, his connection with that land and with his family, and a certain sadness in terms of when he passes, what, you know, who will take on that role of that love of the land. But I don't know, we spoke afterwards about how generous it was of him to let us into that space. And how it helped us to connect, you know, and as a result, even there, you know, Jack Cullen sang at the Wexford. There was, for anybody in the room here, there was a brilliant Wexford traditional singing festival all weekend, where people from all over Ireland travel, and it's not very well publicised, but people just come and share their songs and their stories, and they share themselves really. And even, you know, Cullen, my young lad, sang a song, Carrig River, which I would have learned from the singing of Seamus Brogan here in Wexford. And now I've had people from America, you know, Kevin Elam has, you know, messaged me and asked me about that song, and he's recorded it because he comes to Wexford and he has won the All-Ireland here in Ireland, you know, singing traditional singing. So I think our songs, our stories, everything like that connects us all. And you mentioned, and I love the way you summed up our contribution to the project. And I hope that's, you know, what we aimed. I always in my work try to unearth the similarities as opposed to the differences, because I think if we can, you know, connect into those, we as a people can connect and be together more. So yeah, this project, I've said this to you before, this project has, you know, evoked a lot of thought, even in my own journey, my own pilgrimage from, you know, having to leave my own home place of Dublin because of the economic you know, situation at the time when we were in a position to move, and we had to, you know, move elsewhere. That came with a lot of challenges and struggles. And even though this is my children's place, this is their home place, it is also my home in a, you know, in a way. But you know, there's those challenges that you face the whole time.
Yeah.
And this project has been fantastic. Would you?
Absolutely. I think just echoing what you said about that, the moving, we've always reflected on it over the years, but I think this project has really made us focus on that, of where this is our home, but our home is also somewhere else, you know. And like, as I said, we've always reflected on it, but more so in the past couple of months. And I think that really showed maybe when we were getting ready for the presentation, we really did. It really brought a focus.
It was quite emotional, I suppose. Your whole approach to the project, and you know, the whole idea of it. You know, it was quite emotional for us to be involved. Like, at first we were delighted to be involved, but it did take us on a journey from the very start, I suppose, from the presentations to, you know, where our presentation was the final one. I was delighted in a way that ours was the final one, because it was like as if we had come full circle in that pilgrimage as well, in terms of, you know, where we consider home. You know, we've always felt it, we've always chatted about it, but when you were, you know, kind of in a condensed situation with you and the project and other people, and learning and hearing and sharing, and you realize, you know, I suppose the impact that move has had on my own life. You know, I think I've recognized that more. I might have addressed it even more, you know, through the project. You know, maybe I was not really thinking about it as much, or, you know, but it's real, and it's real for everyone who moves and, you know, is on a journey around the world, or, you know, has to leave for certain reasons. And it's made me look at my collecting work as well in a different way, you know, and that's, the project has been brilliant, Ro, and I've said this to you, we've really been, you know, delighted to be involved, and look forward to the next phase of the new song. And
thank you. That's that's it, isn't it? And if it's quite rare for people to stay in the same place these days, even if you've not left the country, but you've moved you know, away from your home place. Is there anybody else who'd like to say anything, or more? I want to just thinking back about last Tuesday. I do want to thank Damien, who's here again tonight, because we've only really just met Damien in the last couple of weeks as part of the London Irish choir, and and Damien sang in through Zoom at Owlet, which was, I thought, incredibly brave and brilliant thing to do. So thank you, and thank you for coming again today. I suppose it's would anybody in the room like to say anything more, or well, I'm grateful, John, because you did come to some of the earlier sessions, or I think you at the introduction, but then weren't able to come. But I'm glad that we've been able to connect.
It's been delightful actually trying to be part of this, and it's very interesting hearing everybody's separate stories, how they feel about a project like this. It makes you think about, I've moved quite a bit myself in my youth, but now settled. No, it's been very interesting hearing everybody's story as well.
I should also say that I know John, because during lockdown I was working with Span, and we were doing a play through Zoom, and we did Under Milk Wood, and and we did it in translation. So there were two separate casts doing Under Milkwood and Dana Wenallt, and John actually was the Reverend Eli Jenkins in our production, and Jenny, his wife. You were Mrs. Bainham. I was. Yes.
I didn't go to Cleaver for that.
So, but this is the first.
Rowan, could I just interject one little memory there that never got mentioned really in the series that you've just completed. Some of these people who may be your neighbours, they're in the audience, they're in the group in Wales. I'd love them to know of a contribution you made to my home parish of Owlert, apart from the wonderful night in the storytelling house. But I'd like to say to your friends there that we have a very old 6th century holy well in the parish. And Rowan got this marvelous idea. This well is connected to St. Aidan in Ireland, mainly through his successor, St. Mahua Luachra. But Aidan, having been a pupil of St. David, it was David taught him to be an abbot. The connection, a strong connection, and a historically sound one is there. And Rowan got the idea that St. Aidan's well in Bedell, I might be mispronouncing that, you better tell the people there what I mean, Rowan. Bedell, that she got the idea of what we call twinning, and you call it melding, I think. The two wells in our terminology have been twinned, and she brought over water from the well and mixed it into St. Macua's well, and water was brought back recently and they were mixed in the other direction. And I think this is a marvelous connection that we could build on. Bring your own faith, as they say nowadays. It's not really a question of faith. All these wells were pagan sites of interest prior to the arrival of Christianity in Ireland, which of course came to Ireland via Wales. And I think that we'll build on that, and I think that you'll see my words become concrete perhaps as early as this summer, because I think there might be a group of people coming over to visit from the Owlert area. Now, I can't make any undertakings about that, but I think that there's certainly, it just needs the match to the fuse, because several of the people there would be very interested. So we can build something social and something concrete starting from that. But apart from that, it's the wonderful idea and a wonderful contribution that you yourself personally have made. And I don't want to just be praising you, but these are concrete measures that you have introduced, and you deserve great credit and long life and success to you.
Thank you, Brian. Gori me agat, Gori me agat. Thank you, Brian, because you've brought us back as well to ancient connections. This project has been very wide-ranging, or wide in its understanding of pilgrimage, but the impetus has come from the Ancient Connections project, which is linking Wexford with Pembrokeshire, and one of its chief sort of activities has been the creation, except possibly not really a creation, the re-establishment of a pilgrimage route between St David's in Pembrokeshire and Ferns in Wexford, and the backstory to that, in a way, being the relationship between St David and his pupil St Aidan, who studied with St David in Wales, in Pembrokeshire, and then returned to Wexford and founded his own monastery at Ferns. And the new recreated pilgrimage route does indeed pass through Owlet, and from St David, so it will go up the coast to Fishguard, and then you get the ferry. You walk around Lady Island, which is another site of pilgrimage in Wexford, up through Oilgate, where there is a well that is actually dedicated to St David, and then on to Enniscorthy, Owlet, and on to Ferns. And 2023, this year, I'm looking at Janet, because Janet is education and sort of pilgrimage officer at St David. So 2023 is the year of pilgrimage.
Year of pilgrimage, because it marks the 900th anniversary of Pope Calixtus II declaring that we were a place of pilgrimage, which is quite a few centuries. But actually what it does say is that it was actually, he was acknowledging what was already happening since the 6th century. So we've had 1400 years of pilgrimage. So we're just picking up the baton again and moving it a bit further.
So that's why I sort of thought it was very, I wanted to do this session here in Tŷ'r Pererin as well. So that is the Pilgrim's House, which is here in St David's. It felt like the right place to be at this point. I just think so the project isn't over, although this sort of bit of it is. We're kind of moving into more of face-to-face activity now. So I'll just talk about things that will be happening. At the beginning of March, Rachel and John and some of their singers are coming to Wales to take part in the Narberth A Cappella Voice Festival, and Rachel will be delivering a workshop at the festival and teaching a macaronic song that will have relevance again to the connection between Wexford and Wales. But also what I haven't mentioned as well is Rachel is actually working on a sort of contemporary song of pilgrimage in the traditional style, if that doesn't sound like an oxymoron. But yeah, so we also, as a sort of result of this series of talks, we're going to be making a new song that is hopefully sort of inspired and informed by the things that we've learnt and shared during this time. And then Molara, as I mentioned, has been teaching Pererin Wyf a new arrangement, her arrangement, I believe, to Cor Pawb in Pembrokeshire, and she will be going to Enniscorthy in Wexford the following week to Rachel being here, and there'll be a workshop in Wexford where we'll be teaching the hymn Pererin Wyf. And later in the year, on the 29th of May, there is going to be a big event in St David's, a kind of, it's going to be like a medieval fair, but the hope is that as part of that event, there will be a kind of massed singing of the hymn Pererin Wyf, and we hope that some people from Ireland will be able to join that event. And there will also be a similar event in Ferns, which again is a sort of celebration of the Ancient Connections work and of all the different strands, because this is only one part of that project. So that there will be a place where all those strands are brought together, and we hope that we will be part of that somehow as well. Is there any more to say? So yes, we will keep in touch about the activity, and yes, the intention is that somehow we will bring the new song to life in the coming weeks and months, and we will find a way of sharing that with you. But I'm going to keep that enigmatic for the moment, and that will be our next phase. Colm has his hand raised.
I just want to mention there is a song of Aidan or Eden, who is the Aidan we've been talking about, Aidan or Moog Eden, different names given to him. But there is an old song, hymn of Aidan. It would be nice to see it included somewhere.
It would be nice to somehow get it on the map. Perhaps you might be able to sing it, Colm.
No, I don't actually know it. I have a copy of it. All right, but
Is it? It's how old is it? Do you know?
It was, well, it's not actually that terrible old. It was written by Dean MacFall. I would say probably in the 50s. He wrote a number. He wrote a number of hymns, but that hymn to Eden was one of them. And Eden and Aidan, Moog, Mailog, they're all the one referred to the one person. So just thought worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Brian, have you heard of it, Brian?
No, I haven't heard of it, but we should be able to locate it, shouldn't we?
Oh, I have a copy of it.
Oh, you have it, yeah. Grand.
Yeah.
Grand. And is that with music?
I haven't, well, I must be honest and say I haven't done an awful lot of research on it, but I don't have the ear of it, but I'm sure it was sang by the choir, the St. Eden's choir at some stage. So there would be music for it.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. You remember the story of St. Aidan and the women washing at the well?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Well, I've just come back. You can see all the towels hanging on the door here.
Yeah.
Can you see all the towels hanging on the door?
Did you get stuck?
I've just come back from where the women were washing in Burns. It's a famous story of St. Aidan.
Did you get stuck to the stone?
They did, yes.
Yes, they got stuck to the stone, yeah. That's
And
right.
it was a curse on them eventually because they wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
When the chieftain couldn't free his daughter, they pleaded with Aidan or Moog to release her, and he did. And they changed and became Christians. So that was the end of the laundrette. The well is still going. I actually live beside the well, and you do see a certain amount of traffic up and down to the well. People still use it for believing in it for cures, particularly for skin rashes and things like that, warts and. Say it give you good looks if you wash often enough. So I obviously didn't wash enough.
Well, yeah, we hope to visit that well when we're in Wexford. Bringing up the different names to Aidan there as well. In Wales, he's also known as Maddock.
That's right.
And, Paul knows the church near Broadhaven, isn't it? Is dedicated to Maddock of Ferns. Yeah. And also near to Narberth, I hope we'll be able to visit when you're here, Rachel and John. There's a Llawhaden is also connected to St. Aidan, and there's a beautiful church there as well.
What was the place you said?
Llawhaden.
In
Pembrokeshire, near Narberth.
Yes. I have visited it a couple of years ago. My wife and myself went over to find some of Aidan's history and some of Moog's, and I must say we really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Lovely place.
So it's 5 to 7. So I suppose we are we're at our our end point, I suppose. Is there did anybody, anything else that anybody wants to say? Was there anything more in the chat that I've missed? Molara is saying that her next arrangement will be Yma o Hyd, which is a Welsh folk song from the 60s. Would it be 60s? 80s, early 80s, not David Iwan, that has had a great revival this past year in association with the Welsh football team. Yeah.
They need something.
That's the rugby team. Don't mention the rugby. Sorry.
Rebuilding process going on, Rowan.
Sorry?
There is a serious rebuilding process.
Yes. Okay, so I think to bring it to a close tonight, I should say thank you to Span Arts, who I'm working with and for. Thank you to Jake, who is here. You haven't seen tonight at all. No, he's behind a camera and behind another laptop and sorting out the technical aspect of this. Thank you to everyone in the room tonight who's come and shared, and thank you to all of you, to Rachel and John, to Brian, and also to Professor James, who I'm glad has been part of the session tonight, and also Molara as well. Everybody who's come. And yeah, we'll just say nos da, slan, go well, and hopefully see you on the road soon.
Nos da.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks, everyone. Slán ihuwa.
Ihuwa.
Ihuwa. Nos da.